Well, everybody, I got such positive reception from all the kitchen table electronics repair videos that I've done so far, including a lot of people asking me to do more, that I've come up with two more. And the first one is this Sony stereo receiver. This is a Sony STR-DH100 stereo receiver. Just a simple two-channel set. No home theater functions or anything like that. Well, this was a shelf demo at Best Buy. And it was listed as having no power, and let's just say it was priced very, very agreeably, as in $8. So I figured, why not? But the problem is, it's had some abuse. I don't think it's ever been played. I don't think it's ever been plugged into an outlet or anything, other than to test it, and they said it had no power, and that indeed it does not. So let's go inside and see what's going on. Well, they all look like parts. The unit's even pretty clean inside. Doesn't really look like it's had any use to speak of at all. And the fuse isn't blown back there. Of course, there are those red things on the circuit board that you see, those red rectangles, are fuses that don't have a clear casing on them, and I haven't tested them yet to know for sure. But there's definitely some damage there. You can see a crack in the circuit board. And over here on the other side, there's some damage to this front-mounted control board, not to mention the fact that it's badly splayed out. I don't know if anybody's been in here other than me or not. There's some evidence that maybe they have, because there's a screw hole here for the front panel, but I don't know if it was actually fastened with a screw or not, because it seems pretty sturdy on its own when it's all put together. And of course the roach palace is filling in tonight for the kitchen table. But there's also a screw hole there. I don't know if there was actually a screw in it, but the arrow would tend to make you think that there was. Another thing that's kind of curious about this receiver is the way the top cover, although it has slits cut in the metal to ventilate with, it's got this plastic guard on it. I'm not sure what that's for. It doesn't seem to be mentioned in the manual for the receiver. So at the very least, I'm going to have to pull this main circuit board and the control panel board and see if I can determine what exactly has been damaged here and just how bad the damage may be. Well, there's a look at the display panel, which is mercifully not broken. Doesn't take one too long to see that they use this display in a great many fancier devices, because there's a lot of home theater specific indications in here that'll never be used in this unit. And as for this break, it's not so bad that it's completely through the board, but it looks like the only thing it ought to affect is the functionality of the volume control, and not the ability to power on and off. So I'm going to have to look at the main board and see what I can see there. Well, there you go. You can see the damage firsthand. You can see the crack right along there. It's definitely running across two traces going to a relay. And this little ribbon cable over here actually goes off to the headphone board, as does at least one of those traces. So I don't know if that's enough to kill power to the unit or not. The soldering on the final transistors also looks a little shaky to me, so I may reflow those a little bit, but by and large I really don't notice any massive amount of destruction on this circuit board. Interestingly enough, although Sony makes their own stereo controller IC, they used a Fujitsu microcontroller on this. Just kind of an interesting choice. Guess it was just a matter of whose part they could buy the cheapest. So I'm going to have to glue that back together after I take the stress of the amplifier heatsink off of it, and then I'm going to have to bridge those damaged traces. There's a really fine one that I don't know if I can bridge that or not. I may have to go point to point on that puppy. But these bigger ones, I ought to be able to scrape that green material off, flux them up like I did with the flat panel TV last time, and then join them back together. Yep, it just looks like someone took a bite right out of it. Now, back over here at the other house for a little while. I've got the circuit board bonded back together, and a little bit of copper solder mask scraped off of there so I can see the underlying copper, and hopefully solder some wires to it. Should be able to jumper around all those broken pieces. Now, the very most of these are just more of that same old wire from a scrapped PC power supply, a Dell power supply whose fan stalled and it promptly burned itself out. The thin wire is just what you might suspect it to be. It's actually a twist tie. but it's got a wire core and it'll solder, so I used it. Anyway, now it's time to throw this stereo receiver back together and see if that's all the fixes that it requires. Alright, there's the patchwork so far done. Now it's just time to put this back in the frame of the stereo receiver body and see if it works. Well, it's time to see if there's any hope at all, and for the momentous occasion, the keykeeper has joined me. He's given me the thumbs up. Anyway, I've got the obvious damage on the main board fixed, so if there's nothing else wrong, I think it stands a pretty good chance of coming out of it. But this is just a very temporary configuration. If it's successful, I'll put it the rest of the way together, and voila, I have a stereo receiver. If not, I guess I'll have to troubleshoot a little bit more. Alright everybody, here we go. It's time for the grand test. Keykeeper, you expecting smoke?
Yes, sir.
Alright, let's see what we get. Heard a relay click. Oh, and we've got a display. She's alive, boys and girls. Let's see if the volume control works. No, we got no volume control. I'm going to have to fix those traces. But this is very encouraging. It's definitely going the right place. So now I'll just have to fix that volume control over there because its traces have been cracked. And I should be able to button this thing up. Now here's the problem. Although you really can't see it, there's a hairline crack buttoned up right against the solder joints. This thing broke at the worst possible place. Of course, it fell on the knob. It fell on the volume knob, so I'm really hoping it didn't break the encoder, although I don't think it did. But it also broke the underlying molding here. You can see I can push that away and widen the gap. So I'm going to have to fix that as well, but that's nothing that a little super glue shouldn't be able to take care of. Then I'll have to look at doing this, and I don't think this is going to be fun. It may just be time to go to my friendly neighborhood dollar store and pick up a universal remote and use the volume control that way. But we'll see. It's an irresistible challenge, so why not at least try? Now, if you look, you can see those two copper spots that I scrubbed the solder mask off of. I basically have to go from the solder points on the volume control to those copper spots. That big ugly looking thing, and yes, that is an ugly job of soldering, and I readily admit it, is just to make sure that that there's a good ground over to this side of the circuit board, because the volume encoder may be dependent on that to work properly. There it is, two thin copper pieces of wire soldered from each terminal on the volume control over to the traces on the board, hopefully far enough to bypass the break. Let's try it out after I make my front panel repair here. Now for the biggest challenge yet. Do we have a working volume control after all that effort? Let's find out. Oh, it's a beautiful thing. Look at that. Just perfect. And that was some really fine soldering too. And now it's time at long last to put this bad boy back together. It's looking more and more like a stereo receiver every second. And just to answer your final question, does it play? Oh yes, it does. Or if that's not quite your speed, talk about a miraculous recovery. Good night.